Hi guys, we're going to start with chapter 1 in Pharmacology for Technicians in 5th edition. Um, this chapter is called The Evolution of Medicinal Drugs. This is basically just going to go over the different people who discovered different things about pharmacology throughout the years. I'm just going to be talking a little bit on each slide. This week I'm probably not going to add any questions because it's a short week. You only have 1 week and it's going to be really busy. So just go through and listen, and it'll kind of help answer a little bit of your questions. These are just our chapter 1 topics that we will learn, from reading the chapter, from doing the review. These are just different things that we'll be going over. The first is the history of medicinal drugs. We'll basically just be learning about the different people who have discovered different things, like I said before. We'll learn about the contemporary pharmacology practice, drug regulation, FDA health concerns. Some of the objectives are being able to recognize the important contributions, events, and resources in the development of pharmacology through the ages. You should know what is meant by pharmacology, and you should also be able to define what drugs are, identify their sources, and understand how they work. You should also be familiar with the federal laws that regulate drugs and the agencies that administer them. You should be familiar with the procedure for getting a new drug to the market. Okay, this is the history of medicinal drugs. Historically, religious leaders controlled all medical treatment, meaning that if you got sick, you went to your priest. They would try to help you. They would create remedies, and they would try to cast out evil spirits because they believed that anytime you got sick, it was from an evil spirit. The knowledge of healing properties of natural substances grew from trial and error. They actually studied things. They started looking for things that, they would record what helped, what didn't, and go through all that way. The concept of drugs in the early Greek records, it's in there as the word pharmakon. And that just means magic, spell, remedy, or poison. Some of our early remedies, we have Hippocrates. He practiced herbal medicine, but instead of just superstition, he used observation and classification, which means empirical learning. So that's what it means that he favored empirical learning. He actually observed people, and he classified different diseases and what helped and what didn't. So he believed that it was from natural, not supernatural causes. And he was the first person to ever dissect a human body to study different organ functions. Galen came after Hippocrates, and he studied the different humors. It's what he called humors, the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. He believed that if you were sick, it was caused by an imbalance of one of the 4 humors. He just basically built upon Hippocrates and came up with his own thing. Galen recorded all of his findings, and his different writings today, if you hear about it, would be called the Galenicals. Another early remedy is Dioscorides. He was the 1st century AD, compiled De Materia Medica. It was just a book of his material and everything that he did. He described and classified 600 plants by substance, not by disease they were intended to treat. During the Middle Ages came Paracelsus. He challenged Galen's concept of the 4 humors. In the Middle Ages, the practice of medicine and pharmacy went back to religious leaders. Actually, everyone started going to the monasteries, and the monks started helping everybody. Paracelsus, though, he used individual drugs instead of mixtures and potions. Instead of mixing different herbs together, he would do one at a time to be able to decide which herb is helping, which one's not. There's no sense in mixing all of these together if there's something they're not even helping their disease. Like I said here, the monasteries became centers of treatment and intellectual life. During the Middle Ages also came the Pharmacopoeia. It was published by Valerius Cordus in 1546. It was then known as the Dispensatorium. Today it's called the Pharmacopoeia. It was during the modern age that the first Pharmacopoeia was compiled in the U.S. Also, in the modern age, we had Claude Bernard. He just told that certain drugs have specific sites of action in the body. He used the laboratory methods, and he founded the field of experimental pharmacology. And pharmacology today is just the science of drugs and their interactions with the different systems of the body and living organisms. It was during the 18th century that some immigrants to the colonies were apothecaries instead of just doctors that were giving out medication. They are the forerunner of today's pharmacists in England. The Pharmacopoeia of the United States was established in 1820, and it was the first official listing of drugs in the U.S. It was published by the Massachusetts Medical Society. Early American settlers had to rely on domestic or kitchen medicine from home remedies until the 18th century, when everyone came over and they were actually apothecaries. They actually started having medications. They started making their own drugs during the American Revolution. It forced the doctors and the pharmacists and drug wholesalers to manufacture their own drugs. Before then, the physicians owned their own pharmacies where they made the medications, and it was all imported from Britain. After the American Civil War, there were defined boundaries between the practice of pharmacists and physicians, meaning that a pharmacist took care of all the drugs, the physicians took care of all the sickness, diagnosing, and prescribing the drugs. Also, the formation of the American Pharmaceutical Association came about in 1852. During the 20th century pharmacology, we had Semmelweis in 1847. He started the whole hand washing with chlorinated lime water in the maternity wards. There were a lot of babies dying, and he was, well, maybe if we wash our hands, germs wouldn't get spread, and so he did that, and it reduced the deaths from the different fevers and things they would get. Next we had Lister. He introduced the antiseptics into surgery. He used carbolic acid for cleaning the instruments and sutures. Ehrlich introduced the arsphenamine to treat syphilis. It was the first agent used to treat an infectious disease. In 1923, Banting and Best got together and extracted insulin from the pancreas to treat diabetes. Next was Domack. In 1935, created the first antibiotic, which was a sulfa drug called Prontosil. In 1945, Alexander Fleming was at St. Mary's Hospital in London when he discovered penicillin, which changed everything. It made everyone a lot better, helped a lot of people survive a lot of bacterial infections. This is a discussion page. We're not going to do anything with this. Next is the contemporary pharmacology practice. It's a science based on systematic research to determine the origin, nature, chemistry, effects, and the use of drugs. The key concept in pharmacology is that drugs do not create new functions in the body, that they just affect the existing functions. It's the responsibility of the pharmacist to make sure that the dispensing of drugs is correct. They direct the preparation of compounding drugs. They recommend patient pharmaceutical care and provide medication, information, and counseling. The counseling is the most efficient measure taken to prevent medication errors. However, it is the pharmacy technician's responsibility to make sure that the patient knows that the pharmacist is available for counseling. The technicians, they process all of the prescriptions. The roles depend on the state law, which can vary greatly from state to state. There are state laws and federal laws. The most strict is the one you have to follow. The pharmacy technician also manages the computer systems, and they ensure that safe and effective systems are in place. Pharmacy Technician Certification Board, the PTCB. Some of you may have already taken this test. Some of you may have not. There's other organizations you can join in addition to this, but the PTCB, they develop, maintain, promote, and administer an accredited national certification program for the pharmacy tech. They provide certification and recertification programs and services. And certified technicians with PTCB must recertify every 2 years. You just do CE credits. It's like 20 hours of CEs, and you send it in, pay your fee, and then you get recertified. But when you go to take your certification test, it will be through PTCB. Medicinal drugs, pharmacologic effects, drug actions on the living system. Classifications of medicinal drugs. There's therapeutic drugs. Those relieve symptoms of a disease. And the prophylactic drugs prevent or decrease the severity of a disease. So therapeutic drugs could be like antibiotics, prophylactics, or like vaccines. Pharmacognosy is the study and identification of natural sources for drugs. It's plants, animals, minerals, chemicals. These are some of the drugs that come from natural sources. Digoxin actually comes from a plant, as well as morphine. Synthetic drugs are drugs produced synthetically in a lab from chemical substances. Then you also have biopharmaceuticals that are produced from recombinant DNA technology. Those are mainly your clotting drugs, blood factors, things like that. Some of the drugs synthetically produced are sulfa drugs, aspirin, and sodium bicarb. This is just a table of drug sources, names, and their therapeutic effects. Like I said, the plant foxglove is where they get the drug digoxin for cardiac, blood pressure, things like that. Pepsin comes from the stomach of a hog or a cow. It's a digestive enzyme. Silver, they use silver nitrate in the OR sometimes as an anti-infective. Prilosec is a synthetically produced drug. And bioengineered epigen, it stimulates our red blood cell formation. And this is just another discussion page. We're not going to do anything with that. Drug names and classifications. The chemical name is just the chemical makeup. Then you have the generic name. That's the name the manufacturer gives the drugs. It's not protected by a trademark. It starts with a lowercase letter, and it's a shortened version of the chemical name or an indicator of the class of drugs. You should know the different terms, the chemical, generic, and brand. Brand name's a trade name. It's copyrighted. It's used exclusively. No one else can ever use that. You can have generics, a few different generics with different brand names, but the generic name's the same. Drug names and classifications. There are many guidelines that direct the naming of a drug. It has to be a safe name. It has to suit the drug. It has to help identify the drug and the international information exchange. You have to put in a request for a drug name, and it's made after the investigational new drug application is submitted to the FDA. Some alternative medicine is like homeopathic remedies, herbs, supplements. A lot of money is spent every year on this. Homeopathy is the system of therapeutics where diseases are treated with minute doses of a drug, and it produces the same symptoms in a healthy person as the disease being treated. So you'll have some people taking herbal medicines for cholesterol, but the cholesterol medicines are also sometimes made like from the same herbs and stuff. So it's always important to tell your doctor or find out if your patient is on herbal medicines. They don't want to be on an herbal medicine and a synthetically produced medicine like Lipitor or something like that for cholesterol, and they interact with each other or give them too much. This is just some concerns about alternative medicine. Like I said, they don't tell their prescriber and the pharmacist that they're taking them, and interaction can often occur between prescribed drugs and alternative medicines. And a lot of the alternative medicines are not covered by governmental regulations, meaning if you have two different brands of an herb, one can be a lot stronger than the other. They're not regulated. And per pill also, one pill can have more than the other one. It's just not regulated. People are just in there making them. The U.S. legal system regulates the manufacture, sale, and the use of drugs. State and federal laws govern the development, prescribing, and dispensing of drugs. Like I said again, the most strict law has to be the one that's followed. Now we're on to the FDA. In 1906, the first attempt by the U.S. government to regulate the sale of drugs or substances that affect the body. That was from the Federal Food and Drug Act, which is also the Pure Food and Drug Act. In 1927, there was the formation of the Food, Drug, and Insecticide Administration, and in 1930, the name was changed to the FDA, and that's how we know it still today. In 1938, the passage of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was happening. All the new drugs had to be proven safe before being marketed, and the new drug application was in effect. You had to fill that out to be sent to the FDA so they can go through trials and all of that so they can approve your drug. In 1951, the Durham and Humphrey Amendment separated the drugs into two categories, either legend drugs or over-the-counter drugs. Legend drugs had to have a prescription, and they're always marked with RX only. Over-the-counter drugs can be sold without a prescription. The FDA regulates the legend drugs and the OTC drugs. They also regulate medical and radiological devices, food, cosmetics, biologics, and veterinary drugs. They do not test the drugs themselves. The company has to do all of the trials and the testing, and they send their results to the FDA to be approved. Companies seeking to market drugs must test and submit evidence to the FDA that the drugs are safe and clinically effective. Medication guides are in every medication, in every box. There are some medication guides that have to be distributed to the patients when they're dispensed. Some of those are the extended-release morphine, OxyContin, fentanyl patches, birth control, NSAIDs, antidepressants, and there's some other ones as well. Most retail computer systems print these guides out automatically when the drug label is printed, so a lot of times the medication guides go out with everything. Some medication guides prepared for entire classes of drugs, like I said, the NSAIDs and the antidepressants. Some are prepared for specific drugs. Medication guides must be given to patients at all dispensings for about 300 drugs. That's wild, which is probably why they came up with the whole printing it out automatically. So they just send it on out, which is good. You don't have to remember. Technicians should make sure that the patient receives the proper medication guide. They can put the guide together with the drug for the pharmacist when the pharmacist verifies the drug. So that's another one of your duties. This is just about the drug approval process through the FDA. They require the manufacturer of a new drug to provide evidence of the new drug's safety and effectiveness. Before the new drug application is submitted, testing is done on animals, and if it works well in animals, and if they're not dying or there's not any really bad effects on the animals, then they submit that application. The new drug application specifies the proposed label, documents the drug's development and testing, details the manufacturing, processing, and packaging, and also the quality control. After that, it goes into the clinical trials. They separate the patients into two groups. One is the experimental group and one is the control group. The experimental group receives the drug and the control group receives the standard treatment for the illness or a placebo. The double-blind study is how they normally do it, meaning that the doctor, the manufacturer of the drug, the patient, nobody knows who's getting the placebo and who's getting the drug. And that's just the best way to determine what the new drug does. That way people aren't, making up things, and the staff isn't making up things either. This is just the 4 phases of clinical trials. Phase 1, studied in 20 to 100 healthy people, and these phases come after the new drug application is submitted, so it's after the animal testing. If that goes well, they go into phase 2. It's studied in patients who have the condition it is intended to treat. In phase 3, they test again, and they compare to commonly used treatment. And in phase 4 is the continuation of testing after the drug is approved for marketing. So this only goes on if the FDA approves it, which is hardly ever. The approval process takes 7 to 10 years, but the FDA has changed things to where if the drug is needed urgently, if it's a major problem, that they can fast track it. The Prescription User Fee Act of 1992 shortened the FDA's review process for new drugs. They act on standard applications within 10 months and act on priority applications within 6 months. The FDA considers a new drug safe enough to be approved when the benefits outweigh the risk. Drugs are not tested on pregnant women. Based on all the available information, drugs are grouped into safety categories for use during pregnancy. If you ever see a drug that's classified as an X classification for pregnancy, that means a pregnant person absolutely cannot take that medication. It causes severe defects in the birth of the baby. One of those is Accutane. It's something that you would probably want to look up. Look up the effects of Accutane on a baby if a mother takes it while they're pregnant. You would get some really interesting stuff there. These are the pregnancy categories. A being no risk, B being the risk cannot be ruled out, C, take it with caution, D, it's a definite risk, and X, absolutely do not use. Like I said with the Accutane, they make most girls taking that have pregnancy tests once a month, and they also have to take an oath before they can get the prescription saying that they will not get pregnant while using that drug. What would you do if an obviously pregnant woman is picking up a prescription for a drug with the FDA pregnancy category B rating? Normally with that, you would just bring it to the pharmacist's attention. Don't counsel them, have the pharmacist do it. This is the post-marketing surveillance. Like I said, it's the phase 4. It's the testing after the drug is approved. Um, the Office of Compliance oversees the drug manufacturing process. They ensure that the manufacturers follow good manufacturing practices in the FDA regulations. Professionals and consumers can report serious adverse reactions to MedWatch. That's FDA's medical products reporting system. You can do it online. If a drug poses a health risk, the FDA can remove it from the market even though it's already been approved. They can do a recall. The manufacturer can do a voluntary recall. Just different things like that. But things are taken off the market after being approved. Removing drugs from the market. Safe does not mean harmless. Every drug has its risks. The FDA evaluates significant adverse effects to determine the seriousness and likelihood that they were drug related. If the risks outweigh the benefits, the FDA will ask the manufacturer to withdraw the drug from the market voluntarily. They will do that first. If not, they will have to step in and remove it themselves. This is just a discussion. There isn't many nowadays, but there's a lot of older drugs that have been taken off. I don't really remember a whole lot that was considered safe and then removed from the market. I know they had removed a bunch back in the day before all of these regulations and this approval process was started. Black box warnings are in the package inserts. They are for drugs on the market and found to be problematic, but still provide therapy for specific conditions. They alert the prescribers to known problems. There are thousands of drugs on the market that have black box warnings. If you're in a retail pharmacy and one is prescribed, that black box warning will pop up on your screen. So you always know it's there. You should always alert the pharmacist, but it will pop up on their screen as well when they check it. The Controlled Substances Act was put into effect in 1970. It was to combat escalating drug abuse. In 1973, the establishment of the DEA branch of the U.S. Justice Department, they regulate all of the controlled substances. One big thing that happened this past year, this past October, was that hydrocodone with Tylenol recently changed to a Schedule 2. So that's all hydrocodone products. The Lortab, the liquids, the Tussinex, anything containing hydrocodone at all. Let's see. This is another one where we have federal laws and state laws for controlled substances, and the strictest law takes precedence. Inventory control for C2s is a lot different too. Schedule 2 narcotics, they are the ones that pose the most risk, and every pill has to be accounted for. They do, at the pharmacy that I help work at right now, they do perpetual inventory, meaning that after every drug we pull that's a C2, we go back and inventory that drug to make sure that the count is right, down to the pill. To get a C2 filled, the pharmacy must have the signed script, and they get no refills. So if you ever see a prescription come in that is for an OxyContin or something like that, and it has 5 refills written on it, someone's probably forged that. This is just the different controlled substance levels. C1 is the highest potential, but those are like street drugs and stuff. They're not legal in the United States. C2 is the highest possibility, which can lead to severe dependence. Those are your oxycodones, your OxyContin, methadone, Adderalls, hydrocodones now. C3s are your moderate potential. That's where the hydrocodones were. When they first came out, they were a C2. They moved them down to the C3, and now they're back up to the C2. The C4s have really low potential. Those are your cough syrups, like just your guaifenesin with codeine, things like that. People don't really abuse those much. These are just more discussions. We're not going to do anything with that. Next we're on to generic drugs. The patent grants the sponsor the sole right to manufacture a drug while the patent is in effect. Under a patent, generic and brand name of a drug belong to the drug sponsor. Once the patent expires, other companies can produce this drug as a generic. Usually when a new drug is formed, it's called by its brand name, and the patent lasts for normally 7 years. Once that run out, most manufacturers have their generic of that drug coming out in the next week. I mean, they have it ready to go. They have everything approved. They just have to do an abbreviated new drug form through the FDA. It's kind of like the new drug application for a new drug, but it's abbreviated, just showing that the generic drug is the same as the brand. It's the same strength, the same medication, the same ingredients, everything. Like I said, it must be equivalent to the brand name drugs. And they have to be able to prove that. They just don't have to go through the clinical trials and the testing. The FDA has an A/B rating system to establish the therapeutic equivalence for generic drugs. The FDA has identified generics not therapeutically equivalent, and those are located in the Orange Book. You should probably know the requirements a generic drug should meet. They're on page 18 of your book to be approved by the FDA. OTC drugs, there are a bunch of drugs used in treating a disease that are OTC. A lot of, you've seen a lot of the GERD drugs coming out over the counter, the Nexium, the Prevacid, the Prilosec. Those were all legend drugs, meaning you had to have a prescription. And recently they've been coming over the counter, so that's kind of a good thing. I can remember when Nexium first came out, and it was super expensive to get filled, and it was like insurances weren't covering it, and you were having to pay out of pocket, and it was like $100, and now you can buy it over the counter. So it's kind of crazy how pharmacy changes so fast. Pharmacy technicians can play an important role in helping patients identify the ingredients in the OTC medications. If you have a patient come in that needs help finding stuff, you can help them. You can read on the back. You can tell them why this one is different from this one, because it has different ingredients. So you can help out a lot. FDA food health claims. The primary objectives of the FDA for the food health is weighing risks against the benefits and protecting consumers. In 1999, the FDA authorized food companies to promote disease-fighting and cancer-fighting benefits of whole grains and breakfast cereals. So if your food contains 51% or more of whole grain ingredients, they can market that their food is disease or cancer fighting. In 1999 also, they authorized the use of health claims about the role of soy protein in reducing the risk of coronary artery disease. These products are not substitutes for prescribed medications. This is just the last discussion. What would you do if a customer patient told you that they were not going to continue prescribed cholesterol lowering medication because they were going to be eating more whole grain cereals? This is another thing where you would probably just direct it to the pharmacist. This is just assignments. You don't have to worry about any of this. These slides right here. All of your assignments are in Canvas, and as long as you complete those, you're going to be doing the chapter review. I don't know if you guys got the Study Partner CD. If you want to do those, there's some different games and things that would help you. You can do that too. And then you'll do your workbook and your quiz at the end of the week. And like I said, don't worry too much about that Canvas syllabus quiz. It's super, super easy. If you listen to this, read your chapter, you're going to do great. Thank you for listening, and hopefully next week will be less stressful because you'll have 2 weeks and you'll just have a lot more time to do your work. So, thanks again.